Well, they used to say over there, we'll take you to the phone booth, but I'm not sure you'll ever make it back to the unit.
So, but you were an athlete, you were a 3-sport athlete, you were used to working, and so it wasn't a big deal for you to go through, and you volunteered to do it.
Right.
So you get done with boot camp, and then what's next? You must have to go to some kind of MOS school to learn your trade, right?
I stayed at Fort Polk, Louisiana for wheeled vehicle repair school. And that was another, I think, 8 weeks or 7 weeks. And then after that, they decided I was a pretty good mechanic, so they sent me to Fort Sill, Oklahoma for track vehicle repair school, which was everything that the Army owned that had a track on it. You know, self-propelled howitzers and armored personnel carriers, tanks, you name it, anything that had a track on it.
Did you enjoy all that? I
did.
Yeah, like I have a nephew that he just loves all kinds of big machinery. You know, he just any Caterpillar, any big piece of machinery, he just loves it. And I could see him joining the Army to be a tank repairman. And then, so how long does that school last?
Another 8 weeks.
And at this point, are you? I mean, with the war going on, are you starting to be more aware of possibilities of where you could end up?
Well, you would hear people talking about it, and some of the people that I took the track vehicle school with were people that had been in the military for a year and a half, 2 years, were already E5, or some of them actually even E6, who had the wheel part of it but never the track part. And I think they were kind of merging those two MOSs, so that's why they were training in both categories.
Did you have any guys in those schools that had already been to Vietnam?
We did not in either one of those schools, but I did. My first assignment was to the 24th Infantry Division in Germany, and there were Vietnam veterans in our unit in Germany.
So you wrap up your school, and that's your first permanent duty is over in Germany. And you show up there, which has got to be a good time. I mean,
it's pretty decent.
19. Yeah. So are we in the 67 yet?
Yep, we're in 67.
So 1967. How old are you?
19.
19 years old, and you get stationed where in Germany?
Augsburg.
Did you drink any beer while you were there?
A little bit. Yeah. I think everything right outside the gate, just like the military bases here in this country. All the pubs are right outside the gate.
And you're 19 years old. You got more. You're the richest human being in the world because you got that. What were you, an E3 or an E4?
$97 a month is what it paid when I joined the Army. I quit a $150 a week job to get $97 a month, but I got all the clothes and free food I wanted. So.
Yeah, I was looking at one of my pay stubs the other day from when I first joined the Navy, and it was, I want to say it was like $700 a month or $642 a month. And I was looking at it going, dang, they got me pretty good, didn't they? For a month. But you're in Germany, and what's your job there? I mean, you're working on tracks like you were supposed to. That's what you're doing.
Well, I did a little bit of that, and what they assigned me to do was run the TI Bay technical inspection on all the vehicles. You know, having been around the military, every vehicle has to have a logbook. All the logbooks have to be up to date with repairs and maintenance on them. So my job was to sort of ferret out what needed to be done, making sure the driver took care of it, and if not, then we sent the rest over with a work order over to the regular mechanics, and they'd replace or fix something that was damaged at that point.
Now, are you doing any time in the field at this point?
We used to go to Grafenwehr, Hohenfels, Weilflecken, and do training out that way.
So you'd go out and do a big exercise, and when you would do those exercises, would you be one of the crew on any of the tracks, or would you be standing by to repair them?
Only standing by to repair them, because the motor pool was battalion motor pool, and it was big enough that you had the full contingent of mechanics, welders, and everything else.
And then how long did you spend in Germany?
I spent about 8 months in Germany before I volunteered to go to Vietnam.
Now, at this point, you said you did have guys that had been in Vietnam, and they were with you. And what was the feedback they were giving you?
Well, I mean, they weren't negative about it. They weren't trying to make it overly scary. I think they were realistic and honest about it. But I think one of the things that when I look back at that now, they were okay and they were alive. So, maybe it's really not that bad.
Yeah.
But, I mean, if it had been somebody that had been seriously injured,
Right.
maybe you'd be going, maybe I need to think about this a little bit more. But,
Yeah.
I mean, I was kind of determined to go. And the reason that I was because I felt like when I was in Germany, I felt like I had a civilian job with a green uniform. I didn't figure I was being utilized or I was using myself to the best of my ability. I joined because I wanted to make some kind of a contribution. It wasn't a John Wayne kind of story or anything that big, but I just didn't feel like I was accomplishing that there. And the first sergeant talked to me about it and said, you need to think about this. I'm going to give you 3 or 4 days. Talk to some of the guys that have been in Vietnam. Because, I mean, I think he'd been, and it wasn't anything he just wanted to rubber stamp and put you on a plane, send you back, and get you ready to go. He was really a genuine kind of person who felt like, hey, make sure this is what you want before we actually sign the paperwork and send you on.
Yeah, there's also different people have different experiences in war, and I know in Iraq there was places in Iraq where the living conditions were better than much of the living conditions that I experienced in my normal life in America. And then you go 10 miles away, or sometimes even 3 miles from that point, and you're outside at some forward operating base, and it's really dangerous and really hard living conditions, and it just depends on where you are. And I think the other thing you were just talking about, I think they call it survivor's bias, which is the only people that we get to talk to. Like, it happens with businesses. Someone says, oh, I did this with my business, and that's why I'm a multimillionaire now. And everyone says, well, that must have worked, so I'll do it. What you don't get to talk to is all the people that they tried that and it failed. So, yeah, from your perspective, you're hearing from guys that were in Vietnam, and like you said, I don't want to say they had a good time, but it wasn't that bad because they were coming back to be able to tell you about it. So you thought about it for a few days. What were you seeing on the news at this point?
You didn't see much news at all when I was in Germany. I mean, I don't know whether I ever watched a television all the while I was there.
And were there any like intel reports? Were there casualty reports? Were you seeing? Like, I remember for me in Iraq, I was always paying attention to how many people were getting killed every month. I mean, I tracked that all the time, and you'd see those numbers creeping up, and they crept up, and I paid attention to that. Was that something that you were looking at thinking, well, hey, that could be me?
Never saw any or never heard any reports of that at all. I mean, I think there was information shared that people were dying in Vietnam, but there wasn't any statistical paperwork that actually would bear out all those numbers.
So you talk to the first sergeant. He tells you give it a few days. You give it a few days, and you say, "Yep, I'm still in. I want to go do this." Did you, when you go volunteer, what do they do? Are they assigning you to a specific unit? Or are they just shipping you off to Vietnam and you'll get assigned when you get there?
That's what happens. You're a replacement troop. See, basically, I think when Vietnam first got started, whole units went to Vietnam. But as time went on, everybody became a replacement troop. Somebody would rotate out tomorrow, another guy would come in. 3 days later, another guy would rotate a month. You know what I mean? It just went on that way all the while I was in country.
So how long did they give you to prepare? Did you do anything different to prepare? How long did it take from the time you said, hey, I want to go? Yep. And then how long was it before you left?
It was about 2 weeks before I actually got orders that came down from battalion or brigade. Went home on a 30-day leave back to Minnesota during the month of February of 1968. And then I reported to Fort Lewis, Washington on the last couple of days of February 68, was in country by March the 1st of 68.
Did you fly over on civilian aircraft?
I did.
With stewardesses and food?
Braniff Airlines, if I remember correctly, which is not even in existence anymore.
What was it called?
Braniff
Airlines. Yeah. And that was... What about saying goodbye to your parents? Was your dad nervous? Was your mom a disaster since she was already sad when you joined the Army in the first place?
it was pretty hard on my mom. And I mean, I think it was difficult for my dad, too, because I'm sure they probably both thought I was just absolutely crazy for volunteering to go. I mean, I could have stayed in Germany, ran out my 3 years and got out of the military, but I just couldn't see myself doing that. So it was difficult for him.
So civilian flight, you get over there. What again, talking about movies, and we all see the movies, and I watched all those Vietnam War movies growing up, and they always have the iconic scenes of the new guys in their fresh camouflage uniforms getting off the bird, and there's the hardened veterans that are heading home after a year of combat, and they look like they've been through a year of combat. Did you see that?
I did. Yeah, they were actually loading planes on the same location that we were offloading, so just exactly like you described is what took place.
Anybody talk to you about anything? Anybody say anything to you?
I mean, usually they're kind of giving you just a thumbs up and their great big smile on their face because they know they're loading the bird and going home, so they're happy to be getting out of there.
And the attitude with the guys that you were with, you already talked about the draftees in boot camp that are freaking out. Was there any guys now that are heading to Vietnam and some of those guys probably just got out of advanced infantry training or whatever and have been in the Army for whatever, 4 months.
Yeah, 4 months and then maybe a 30-day leave at home and on their way to Vietnam. And again, that same kind of situation. And I think there, whether you joined the Army or you got drafted, I think there's still that fear, even though that's what you signed up for if you enlisted. There's that fear of the unknown, that you've gotten off this plane and what's going to happen next.
It's weird because I think that a lot of this, your attitude goes a long way, because there's definitely people and times, and myself included, where I would think, there's nothing's going to happen to me. Like, it'll happen to anyone else. I've talked about this before. Like, I always feel if I'm on a commercial airline and it blows up in the sky that I'm going to live. Like, I'm going to grab the seat cushion or something. I'm going to figure it out. So there's that kind of stupid ignorance that I know I had, especially when I was younger. Like, nothing was ever going to happen to me. And I would see that in my guys, when I was older. I didn't go to war until I was, older. And I saw some of the guys that you could tell they didn't think anything was going to happen to them. And I had other guys where you would swear in their mind they had a target on the back of their head every step that they took. And so you get a drastic difference between people's attitudes. Did you see that with different guys? And what did you think yourself?
I did see that same thing. I don't think that's changed any from Vietnam to the generation that served in Iraq or Afghanistan. I think that mixture and that percentage is probably still the same all the time. Certainly a lot of people who had a certain MOS, but maybe they had some other kind of a job in the States would say, well, I might be 11 Bravo, which is a grunt, but I'm not going to have to do that because I was the company armor and I'll be running, distributing weapons and stuff like that. But you'd see them out in the field sometime later. They'd be humping the bush with the 65-pound pack on their back. So, I think there was a certain fear, but a certain courage as well, too, that I think most of the people that I ever served with displayed. And I think even the guys that got drafted came to the resolve that, I'm here, I might as well make the best of this. There's no sense in complaining or whining, and let's just go ahead and get our year in, get my 2 years in the military and get it over with, and I can go home. So, I've always said that the people that I served with were tremendously courageous and extremely brave individuals. I never saw anything that I would ever be afraid to serve alongside of that person. So.
No, that's powerful. That's the American serviceman right there. Because even when I was talking about guys that I knew that would, and so I had friends that would verbally, they'd say, "Oh, I'm not feeling good about tonight, man." They would say that stuff.
Yep.
And guess what? They'd get on their gear and they'd go out night after night. And I actually have to give them more credit because sometimes I think, well, I think I'm going to be fine. It doesn't take me that much courage to overcome that. And here's a guy that has that feeling night after night. But like you said, Every time, night after night, they're getting their gear on, they're going out and doing their job. How did you get assigned? So now you show up. This is what the